But I'm joined in the studio by Natasha Clark, LBC's political editor. I mean, I barely know where to begin, really. I was struck by most of that speech from David Lammy, but a particular moment stands out for me, not just the news that the UK is suspending trade negotiations with Israel. He kind of buried that lead, didn't he, as they say. But there was a point in his description of what was going on inside Gaza, and he called it extremist, dangerous, repellent, monstrous. Two shouts from elsewhere in the Commons, I don't know who shouted it, but shouts of genocide, and later on shouts of illegal, and later on shouts of what are you waiting for? This was a moment in Parliament, wasn't it?
Yeah, this is a turning point in relations between the UK and Israel today, and of course between the international community and Israel too, because of that joint statement that we saw yesterday from Canada, from the US and from the UK, condemning what Netanyahu has been saying and doing for the past few weeks. And that's clearly escalated to a point where the UK government feel they have no choice but to act, and they did so in a coalition with other countries and are making this decision to impose sanctions as well on Israel. And let's not forget, this is an ally of the UK. This is a very, very big deal to be taking such a step. But it has been a long road to it, and I think people that follow this closely will say this is not a surprise that the UK government has chosen to go down that path. And David Lammy, I thought, was very articulate in laying out exactly why Netanyahu's government has gone in a slippery slope down to what he called a dark new phase in this conflict. And that's absolutely clear today, talking about Israel striking hospitals in Gaza, aid workers being killed. This cannot continue. Fewer than 10 trucks of aid entering, I'm not sure if he said it was today, but this week. The UN's obviously ramped up the rhetoric lately, talking about warnings of the threat of starvation of tens of thousands of people. And as Netanyahu ramps up these plans to, as David Lammy was saying, force the people of Gaza into a particular part of the Strip, deny them their land, deny them their homes, and deny them the aid that's not going in to Gaza at the moment, saying there are 9,000 trucks waiting to go in at the border, and his government is not letting them in. This is clearly a turning point for the government where they feel that they've got absolutely no choice but to act.
And we saw yesterday in that press conference about the EU-UK deal, all three of the people present then, Ursula von der Leyen, I always forget the chap's name.
Antonio
Costa, thank you. And our own Prime Minister all asked a question about this very issue, the aid into Gaza. And of the three, Keir Starmer gave the tamest response, didn't he, if that's the right word for it? Not so today.
Yes, he did. And actually, I thought it was
From
interesting.
Lammy, I mean.
Yeah, at that press conference, actually, which I was at Lancaster House, which was on, obviously, the EU-UK reset and the Brexit agreement that had been done. And I thought it was interesting and maybe a little bit odd, actually, that Ursula von der Leyen and Antonio Costa chose to talk about Gaza in their opening statements, which felt to me a bit odd. And you don't usually do that as politicians unless there is something very pressing. And you heard from Keir Starmer him do exactly the same thing in the House of Commons earlier when he did his Brexit statement. He said, I first want to talk about Gaza and how intolerable the situation is, obviously knowing that David Lammy is about to make this statement and to announce the pausing of the free trade deal with Israel, which is an interesting development, and targeted sanctions on 3 individuals, 2 illegal settler posts and 2 organisations which the government says are supporting violence against Palestinian communities in the West Bank. So this is a watershed moment. But yes, Keir Starmer was very cautious, I thought, in his words, compared to the 2 EU leaders yesterday. And obviously there is a lot of conversations going on behind the scenes about coordinated action, and potentially the Prime Minister didn't want to step into that line. But he was asked directly by a journalist, are you considering this genocide? And that is the question that politicians are now going to get asked day in, day out, whether they do agree. They have been anyway. It's true.
I have been, you have been, probably. It's been endless since, a year and a half ago, probably.
Exactly.
On the question of Hamas and the hostages, both David Lammy and Priti Patel chimed on that to start with anyway. She said further things to cries from the Labour side. But Hamas must release the hostages now, said David Lammy. They cannot be allowed to run Gaza. And that was echoed by Priti Patel in her response, talking about the cruel Hamas captivity that the hostages were undergoing. And she said it is clear that and definitive in their minds. I mean, how this is achieved is anybody's guess, but that Gaza must be free from Hamas in any future governance. Now, future governance is, I mean, I know it feels like a long way away, but that was key to what Priti Patel's questioning was about. No further role for Hamas, but she asked, I thought, legitimately, what practical steps are being taken by the UK government towards that political alternative, that, to use David Lammy's terminology, what coordination is happening to stem the flow from Iran, for example, you could throw Qatar into that mix as well, to Hamas of money, what conversations, if any, are taking place between the Palestinian Authority and the UK government. These are really vital questions that she's just put to David Lammy. If, and I know he wasn't being glib when he said it, if there's any chance of a two-state solution and a viable Palestinian leadership.
Yeah, and that's exactly what the government and what Keir Starmer has been saying. And, you saw Netanyahu's response on social media overnight saying, actually, allowing talks on a two-state solution is as actually giving a prize to Hamas for carrying out terrorist attacks against our people. But David Lammy, clear in his response just then, this is not the way to get the hostages back, by forcing Gazans into a strip of land and then drip feeding them aid in this horrific way, which has been condemned by every United Nations and other humanitarian organisations around the world.
Families, not all of them, but many of the hostage families feel the same, don't they? That it's time to get back around the table and sort this out.
And what a sorry state we're in when, a few months ago we were in a ceasefire situation and there was a lot of hope on the horizon for, in
a second phase.
A lot of hope for more releasing of the hostages, a lot of hope for more. Priti Patel, I think, is asking legitimate questions about what the government are going to do next and pushing them on this. But actually, these steps that are being taken by the government today are in themselves a huge, huge step forward and a huge change of tone from David Lammy and Keir Starmer.
I think a big question to all of them is why now? Plenty of people in the Commons and outside will say, well, indeed, somebody did say in the Commons, what are you waiting for? What were you waiting for? You could have said this a year ago. Is the change, the definitive change, the open plan, action to blockade aid?
I think so. I think that's what looks to me, at least, and I haven't spoken to people in government about this, but it looks to me as that's what's the straw that's broken the camel's back. But it's also the increase in rhetoric from the Netanyahu government. Clearly, relationships have broken down, and this is a government and an organisation, a country that we have incredibly good relationships with. But you will remember that, of course, Keir Starmer paused those arms exports to Israel. It has been a long road to this point. It has not been one thing, I don't think, that's the straw that's broken the camel's back. It's been a long road to this point.
Well, we'll hear a little of that exchange between Priti Patel and David Lammy after the news, and we'll continue to discuss it. Your thoughts on all of this, 0345 6060 973. You can text 84850. Thanks, Natasha.